easels for beginner artists, all the equipment that you might want to think about getting that you're going to need. That's if you decided to do painting. Obviously, if you're deciding to do other forms, inks and pastels and chalk and charcoal, there's sort of different materials, and I'll do another video about that later. But today I just thought I'd talk about materials for painting. So the first thing to think about, once you've got an idea of the kind of art that you want to make, the kind of pictures, the first thing to think about is the space where you're going to work. And obviously everyone has different limitations and restrictions. The rule of thumb is the more space the better, but work with whatever you've got. When I first started out painting, I was living in a bedsit, and I would just use a chair and the back of the chair to kind of support my boards and things for painting on. But at some point you'll want to invest in some easels. And I say easels plural because you might want more than one kind, and there's a lot of choice. Small table easels are extremely useful. They're so portable, and great just for doing all kinds of things, sketching on, and they're just very small and light and easy to use, and they're very cheap. You can get one for under £10, just a little tripod table easel. The next type, you can actually see one just here. That's a sketching easel, and again they're designed to be collapsible so that you can go out and use them. I tend to mine's just always in the studio. And they have this tripod formation. So obviously, if you want to hold canvases high so that if you're standing and painting, then they're not ideal because there's not enough support at the bottom of your canvas or whatever you're painting on. There's very little support. So ideally, a bigger, something more substantial and sturdy is better. But I've used a sketching easel for decades, and I've done all kinds of paintings on it. So they're perfectly serviceable. It's really just a question of what you can afford and what kind of space you've got. And there's an awful lot of choice on the market. You can even make your own. There are plenty of people on YouTube showing you how to make your own easels and things like that. Another thing that you might want, and sometimes a second easel can work for this, is a stand, something that can hold pictures that you're going to work from. If you're working from, nice glossy photographs, and you want it as clear to as close to your canvas as possible. So a stand to hold your photograph is great. The other thing to think about is once you've, your space that you've got to work in is the lighting. Sometimes you just have to work with what you've got, but the more or any effort you can make to make your lighting good does make a massive difference to how you'll paint. You don't want any light coming from behind you because it will cause glare on the canvas. You won't be able to see what you're painting. You ideally want it coming from above and a little bit back, but again, the angle has got to be just right so that you're not getting glare on the painting. I will make a small note about why artists paint on easels upright. It's fairly obvious, really, and it's because paintings tend to be hung on walls which are completely vertical, so it's ideal to paint completely vertical. But if you want to lean your easel back or your drawing board or whatever you're using, I mean, that's fine too. Again, that's more suitable for other mediums. Inks and watercolors and gouaches, those sort of things. You can even work completely flat with those. In some ways it's better. Same with pencil and charcoal. You can work flat or on a drawing board, but most of the time, if you can work vertical, then that's the best way to work because that's how the work will be viewed. And so the light is hitting it in the right way. The light is hitting the surface of the canvas and your paint in the right way. So you've got your space and your easels. Another aspect to think of is palettes. For years, people used wood or plastic or even plates, crockery, which are all fine. I've used all those things for years and years, and they're all fine. What a lot of people use now, and I tend to do the same, is glass. If you can get yourself a piece of toughened glass, I think I got mine was an old from an oven door or something like that. But any piece of glass you can get. And there's lots of advantages to using glass. One is that you can paint the back side of the glass to be the same color as whatever your background color is on the canvas. And that will make color mixing a lot easier. Mixing your colors on the palette and they'll look the same when you put them on the canvas because of that background color. And they're also much easier to clean and maintain over years. I happen to have this one sitting here. This is a wooden one, and as you can see, they get covered in paint, and you can sand it back and use all kinds of things to try and keep a flat surface. But they are, they're more work to maintain over time. Glass is very useful. The other thing to think about, obviously, is your paints and brushes. When it comes to paints, I would say don't get paints from kind of toy shops and craft shops, cheap paints that are really made for children. They have very little pigment in them. They won't last, they'll fade, and they don't have the right consistency. But at the same time, you don't need to buy the most expensive artist quality paints either, because they are very expensive. But they will last, hundreds of years probably. If you paint with them, the colours will stay, will have a permanence to them. But if you go to art shops, you can get the student quality paints, and those are more than good enough. I still use them quite a lot. I'll only ever spend more on a tube of paint if I'm working on a commission and I really need to. But student quality paints or mid-range paints are absolutely fine. The quality of oil paints these days is very, very good. One good thing about paints is you don't have to go out and buy 20 or 30 tubes of paint. You only need 5 basic colours. So that would be titanium white, cadmium yellow, alizarian red, or a different red, French ultramarine, and burnt umber. And with those 5 colours, you can mix 95% of all colours that you can see in the world with those 5 colours. The only colours they can't mix is very, very bright primary colours, super bright greens and oranges and pinks and purples. It's not brilliant at those. So when you want those colours, when you need an extra bright colour that you can't mix, go out and buy another tube of paint. So your collections of paints will grow slowly over time. But to begin with, so long as you've got those 5 basic colours, and then maybe, if you can, you might want to add another 2 or 3 tubes that you see that appeal to you, that you think will be useful. So that's, one of the good things about paints is that whilst they are very expensive, you don't actually need to buy hundreds of tubes. Most colours can be mixed just with a few basic colours. In addition to your paints and additives, etc., you'll also probably want to buy some gesso. Gesso is a white acrylic paint that has very, very fine particles in it. So it creates like a fine sandpaper textured surface, which we call tooth. And this draws the paint off of the brush. So gesso is a very useful medium to have. The same thing with brushes. It is worth buying at least half decent brushes from an art supplier. You can get cheap hog's hair paint brushes from kind of craft shops and things like that, super, super cheap. I have used them. I used those, again, the first few years when I was learning. That's what I worked with. And they're kind of fine, so long as they're hog's hair. That's great. They just won't have the build quality of the artist quality materials. And again, in that range of the artist quality materials, they will have the student grade, grade, then a mid grade, and then the sort of expert and professional grade. Just start with the basic ones because you're going to be learning what kind of brushes you prefer to use. People prefer different shapes of brushes. There's round-headed, filbert-headed, flat-headed, angled, and then there's all kinds of specialist brushes, splayed brushes, and all this sort of thing. But to begin with, I would just recommend getting half a dozen hogshair brushes of varying sizes, starting from say about a number 2 up to a number 6 or a number 8. Get 1 or 2 of each of those sizes if you can, um, and that should give you a good range for doing general kind of pictures that will cover a lot of things. Another kind of brush that is also very useful to have would be a wider brush, 2 or 3 inches wide, and that you would use for staining your canvases and also varnishing your pictures once they're painted. Um, a brush for staining can be quite a cheap brush, whereas a brush for varnishing, a better quality brush is preferable just because you'll get far less brush strokes in the varnish. Although, I mean, really, those brush strokes should kind of blend out anyway as it dries. In addition to paints and brushes and palettes and easels, there's also the things you're going to want to mix with your paint, your additives. So linseed oil is very useful to have for thinning out the paints, making them oily, but it will slow down drying. So you'll also want to add mineral spirits. When it comes to mineral spirits, you can stick with the traditional turpentine, but people do have concerns about toxic fumes and things like that these days, and turpentine is quite a toxic fume, even though I absolutely love the smell of it. I try to use it as little as possible, and if I do use it in a very well ventilated space. But you can now get odorless mineral solvents that work fine, and I'm using those as well now. So I would highly recommend those. There was some other sort of oils and additives that can be added, but again, that's really for a little further down the road. This is just the basic. So again, I think linseed oil, mineral spirits, and white spirit for cleaning your palettes and your brushes, and even for when you want to rub something out on a canvas, if you want to change an area and wipe an area out, just a bit of solvent on cloth will work. There was something I wanted to say. Oh, about brushes. Yes. A handy tip about brushes is that you don't actually have to clean them as much as you think you do. So again, for me, when I first started, for the first few years, I was constantly cleaning my brushes at the end of every session in white spirit and then in soapy water, which would get out even more paint. And that did help maintain my brushes for quite a while, but it was a lot of work, very time consuming and messy and smelly. Whereas what I tend to do now is when you're working on a painting, I will have probably about half a dozen brushes for that one painting, and whatever color is on that brush, I keep that. I might lighten it a little or darken it a little, but I keep the brushes separate for separate colors. And then at the end of the session, just dip them in oil, and you can even buy dipping oil. Just dip your brush in oil and put it to one side, and it will keep like that for a few days. If you then cover it with something else as well, I tend to use cling film, then it will keep for days and days, even weeks. And you can just go back in, pick your brush up, wipe the oil out, and start painting. I also wanted to touch on the kind of surfaces you'll want to paint on. There's card and canvas and aluminium and copper and wood panels. There's so much to paint on. But I think this has been quite a long video already. I hope you found it useful. Like I say, I just wanted to cover some of the basic materials and things that you might want to think about when starting out. And if you're interested in any one-to-one tuition, just drop me a line at deanharkness@yahoo.co.uk, and I'll be more than happy to talk to you about anything that you might want to do. So thanks for watching, and I'll upload something else again soon. Thanks a lot. Bye.